Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My wife, Grace, had been acting strangely for weeks. The usual red flags were all there. Diminished intimacy, excessive time on her phone, and an unusual preoccupation with a particular male coworker named Ryan. She spoke about him constantly, always emphasizing how funny he was. Then, she started going out on Friday nights twice a month, not returning until after midnight. That didn't sit right with me. I had no issue with her socializing. I did the same with my friends occasionally, but I always made it home before midnight. When I voiced my concerns about her staying out so late, she brushed me off. "I'm fine, Vic. We just like to hang out," she said, rolling her eyes as if I were being paranoid. My unease grew. I suggested accompanying her to one of these gatherings, hoping it would ease my mind. She immediately shot me down. "Spouses don't come, Vic. It would just be weird." That excuse made no sense. Why would it be an issue? Besides, her parents could watch the kids for one evening. Felt like she simply didn't want me there. That's when I decided I wasn't going to sit idly by any longer. The following Friday, I showed up unannounced. The moment I walked in, I spotted Grace sitting next to Ryan. I expected them to be flirting, given how much she talked about him, but oddly enough, they barely interacted. That, in itself, was suspicious. Even more damning was the fact that two other teachers had brought their spouses. So the spouses don't come rule was a blatant lie. And to top it off, the gathering ended around 9:30 p.m., not 1 a.m. as she had claimed. At that moment, I knew something was wrong. The next day, I checked our phone records. She and Ryan had been texting every single day, exchanging anywhere from 5 to 20 messages. That was all the confirmation I needed. That night, I confronted her, keeping my voice steady. "Grace, let me see your texts with Ryan." She frowned, clearly caught off guard. "What? Why?" "Because you've been talking about him nonstop, texting him all the time, and I have a right to know what's going on." Her expression hardened. "Vic, we're just friends. Why don't you trust me?" "Then show me," I insisted, crossing my arms. She hesitated too long. Then, with a sigh, she muttered, "I don't like the way you're accusing me right now." I wasn't accusing her of anything yet. I was simply asking for transparency. But her defensive stance only deepened my suspicions. I kept my gaze steady. "Grace," I said, my voice low, "show me the texts." She scoffed, called me paranoid, but handed over her phone. I scrolled through her messages with Ryan, and something didn't add up. The chat history showed only a few messages per week, far fewer than what I knew existed. Yet, according to our phone records, they had been texting daily. And then, I noticed the final red flag. Ryan was listed above me in her recent contacts, despite the fact that I had texted her earlier that day. She had deleted messages. That was all I needed to see. I didn't call her out on it. Yet, instead, I let her dig her own hole. "I'm not comfortable with your relationship with Ryan," I said evenly. "I need to think things through." She rolled her eyes. "You're being crazy, Vic. You're making something out of nothing." I didn't argue. I let my silence linger. That night, I slept on the couch, and that seemed to bother her more than anything else. The next morning, she made a sudden declaration. "I'll stop talking to Ryan unless it's strictly work-related. Does that make you feel better?" Her tone was sharp. I studied her carefully. "I don't believe you." She huffed and walked away, and that's when I made my next move. I hired a private investigator. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I was going to find it myself. To my frustration, she never went out again. Not once. For an entire month, she stayed home, acting like nothing had happened. It was clear she was on high alert. I was out a few $1,000s with nothing to show for it. But I knew she had been up to something. Her entire demeanor had changed. Back to the way she used to be before the affair. No more late nights. No more secretive texting. And suddenly, she was affectionate again, initiating intimacy multiple times. But I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. I just wasn't interested. She noticed, of course. One night, She sat on the edge of the couch while I lay there, avoiding her gaze. Victor, I'll transfer to a different school if that'll make you feel better. I finally looked at her. That's not the problem, Grace. She let out a frustrated sigh. Then what is? You're acting like I. She trailed off, shaking her head. I sat up. Like you what? Cheated. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't, she said firmly. I tilted my head. Then why'd you delete the messages? She stiffened, her face paling for just a second before she forced herself to look angry instead. Because I knew you'd react like this. I knew you'd assume the worst. I let out a humorless laugh. You're unbelievable. That was the moment I decided to see a lawyer. We lived in a no-fault state, meaning even if she had cheated, I couldn't use it against her in court. And I wasn't about to risk losing my kids over this. I'd rather sleep on the couch for the rest of my life than only see them every other weekend. When Grace and I finally sat down for the real conversation, I laid everything out on the table. I told her I knew she had been gaslighting me, knew she had lied, knew I couldn't trust her anymore. This time, she didn't even try to deny it. She just exhaled and looked away. I've been thinking about divorce, I admitted, watching her closely. Her eyes darted to the side. Of course you have, she muttered. But you're also thinking about staying? I pressed. For the kids. For co-parenting. Her face twisted. That's not a marriage, Victor. That's a prison sentence. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. I don't want Ryan around my kids. That set her off. Oh my God. Will you let that go? There's nothing going on. I cut her off. You let it go too far. She went silent. That was the first honest thing she had said. She swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, I did. A long pause stretched between us before she finally spoke again. If you don't want to be with me, I'd rather get a divorce. I studied her expression, waiting for her to say more. Her fingers twisted in her lap. But I don't want either of those options, she added finally. She met my eyes, searching for something. I love you, Victor. I want to work on things. She told me she had already put in for a transfer to another school. That Ryan wouldn't be in her life anymore, even if we got divorced. But then, like clockwork, she followed it up with the same tired excuse. It was just a friendship that got inappropriate. Nothing physical ever happened. I stared at her, waiting for the inevitable slip-up, but she held her ground. He wanted you to leave me, I stated flatly. She nodded, looking down. Yes. And you never told him to back off? She bit her lip. No. I let out a slow breath, controlling my temper. So what? He made you feel special? She winced. Victor. Just answer the question. She hesitated before nodding. Yes. And we had things in common that you and I don't. I scoffed. Like what? She took a deep breath. We watched movies together. Harry Potter. That caught me off guard. Are you serious? She nodded. He invited me over 3 times, and we just watched movies. I rubbed my temples. You expect me to believe that? It's the truth, she said quickly. That's all we did. I laughed bitterly. You do realize I've sat through all of those movies with you, right? I know. But you never really watched them, she said softly. You were always on your phone or zoning out. I can quote those stupid movies, I snapped. She exhaled. I swear, Victor, nothing happened. I shook my head. This is unbelievable. Then she dropped another bomb. Ryan sent me a picture. I felt my jaw tighten. Of what? She hesitated. Of himself. I went cold. And you didn't ask for it? No. In fact, I specifically told him not to. But he did anyway. You should have reported that to HR. My voice was barely controlled rage. I know. But you didn't. She sighed. No. Why? She hesitated. I didn't want to get him in trouble. I let out a sharp laugh. Are you listening to yourself? She rubbed her temples. I know it sounds bad. It is bad. She flinched but didn't argue. Then, as if this nightmare wasn't over, she added, for what it's worth, he's, well, big. I blinked. Excuse me? She looked incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't ask to see it, but it was, big. I stared at her in disbelief. And I'm supposed to care why? She fidgeted. I don't know. For comparison? I cut in. Mine's above average, Grace. But I guess I'm not huge like Ryan. Huh. She groaned. That's not what I meant. Then why bring it up? She looked like she regretted ever opening her mouth. I deleted it right after he sent it, she said quickly, as if that made it better. I crossed my arms. And what did you send him? She hesitated just long enough for my stomach to drop. Nothing inappropriate. Grace. She swallowed hard. I sent him a picture of me in that dress and heels I wore to your work event. I wanted his opinion on it. I exhaled through my nose. His opinion? She nodded. And 2 pictures of my feet. I froze. Your feet. She nodded again. It sounds weird, but I used to do some foot modeling. I clenched my jaw. And that's why you sent them? Yes. I shook my head, trying to process everything. But she wasn't done. We also went antique shopping once, she added. I didn't think you'd care since you hate it. I let out a slow, steady breath. And you didn't think to tell me? She bit her lip. No. I ran a hand down my face. And you called him your work spouse. She nodded. I did. But it was just a thing. I liked having someone to talk to about work. I closed my eyes for a second before looking at her again. I had something similar at my job, I admitted. She blinked. You did? Yeah, but it stayed at work. I met her gaze. There was nothing else to it. I kept my so-called work spouse strictly professional. No texts outside of work. No staying out late. No shopping trips. And definitely no one-on-one lunches unless someone else was there. Her expression was unreadable as I continued. It ended the moment she started mentioning that her husband was out of town for the weekend. I could tell exactly where she wanted things to go. And I wanted no part of it. Ironically, she was married to a man who had betrayed her. Grace assured me she had cut ties with Ryan, showing me the message she sent him. It was clear and final. She acknowledged that their so-called friendship had crossed the line and admitted she should have ended it sooner. His response? He immediately launched into an attack against me, claiming we had nothing in common and that she would be happier with him. That was a lie. Grace and I might have had different interests, but we had built a life together filled with shared experiences and genuine love. After a few more desperate messages, she blocked him. Even if she was telling the truth, my anger didn't subside. She had still gone to his house. She had still lied about it. But as I looked at her, devastated and remorseful, I could see she understood the damage she had done. Yet the doubt lingered. We had a great marriage, at least I thought we did. But how could I trust her now? A few days later, I sat down with Grace to have an honest conversation, hoping for clarity. Instead, it spiraled into something I never expected. We decided to call Ryan. She dialed from her phone, and for some reason, my pulse quickened as it rang. When he picked up, she kept it short. Ryan, Victor wants to talk to you. There was a long pause before he finally responded, his voice laced with arrogance. Okay, this should be interesting. I didn't waste time. Why the hell did you think it was okay to send my wife a picture of your junk? Silence. Then, with complete indifference, he said, I'm not doing this crap, and hung up. That was all I needed to hear. I turned to Grace. We're taking a polygraph. Both of us. She didn't even flinch. Fine. Since polygraphs required yes or no answers, I went over the questions in advance and let her answer them first. Did you have sex with Ryan? No, her voice was firm. Did you ever kiss Ryan? She hesitated. Then, with a deep sigh, she admitted, I didn't, but he kissed me. The last time I was at his place. My jaw clenched. And, she swallowed hard. He, broke me briefly while he kissed me. My fists tightened, but I forced myself to remain composed. So, on the test, you'll say no since you didn't kiss him back? She nodded. Right. I moved on. Did you want to have sex with him? This time, she took longer to answer. No. Before I could ask the next question, she blurted out, I mean, I thought about it. I narrowed my eyes. What the hell does that mean? She looked away. I didn't plan on it, but I wondered what it would be like. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. Clarify, she exhaled slowly. When I saw his, I thought, wow, that thing is huge. And for a moment, I wondered if it would be fun. I stared at her, my head pounding. Before I could stop myself, I snapped, I'm sorry, my fun factor isn't up to your standards. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. But I was humiliated, furious, and completely done with this conversation. I stood up, shaking my head, and stormed off to our bedroom. Grace followed, her voice breaking. Victor, please. I ignored her, grabbing clothes and stuffing them into a bag. I wasn't thinking straight. It was impulsive, maybe even irrational, but I needed space. I had always been a little insecure about my size, even though, statistically, I was above average. I shouldn't have cared, but I did. As I reached for the door, Grace grabbed my arm. Please don't go, she whispered, her eyes pleading. We can talk about this. I pulled away. I just need to calm down. Without another word, I walked out and drove to a hotel. She called and texted nonstop, but I ignored most of them. Eventually, I sent a single message, I need time. I didn't want this to be the reason we divorced, but damn, I was hurt and embarrassed. I lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. Then my phone rang again. This time it was my daughter's number. My stomach twisted. If Grace had used our daughter to get me to answer, I was going to lose it. But when I picked up, it was actually her small, trembling voice. Daddy, Mommy's really scared. My anger flickered, replaced by concern. What do you mean, sweetheart? She's crying a lot. She won't stop shaking. She keeps saying she didn't do anything. Daddy, you're being mean. Hearing that from my daughter hit me like a punch to the gut. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my face. I'm coming home. When I got back, Grace was curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her body trembled as she whispered the same words over and over. I didn't do anything. I swear, Victor. I didn't. I knelt beside her, gently pulling her up. Grace. She clung to me, shaking, her words barely coherent. Seeing her like this, the mother of my children, broken and lost, wasn't what I wanted. I had never imagined us here. And my daughter's words echoed in my mind. Daddy, you're being mean. I made a decision whether it was the right one or not. I'm going to believe her. I didn't feel like I had another choice. That night we slept together. It wasn't the same. Not in the way it used to be. Felt hollow, forced, just going through the motions. The next morning, Grace wanted to have sex again. She always used intimacy as a way to cope with stress. But this time I couldn't. My body betrayed me. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't respond. Shame washed over me, making me feel small, insignificant. Grace noticed immediately, but instead of making me feel worse, she just held me. It's okay, she whispered, though I could hear the worry in her voice. She ended up calling off work. She was unraveling, muttering over and over, I need help. But when I asked her what kind of help she needed, she had no answer. I took her to urgent care, where they gave her a 14-day supply of antidepressants and Xanax. At her follow-up, her doctor prescribed them long-term. Even then, she was still a wreck. And so was I. I hated myself for how everything had unfolded. I felt like a complete failure, stuck in a loop of self-recrimination. I had decided to let it go, to move forward. Then, this afternoon, Grace called me. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. What's wrong? I asked. She took a shaky breath. Ryan came over to the house. A sharp jolt of anger shot through me. What the hell did he want? I don't know, she said quickly. I didn't let him inside. I told him to leave, and when he wouldn't, I grabbed my phone and started recording. My jaw clenched. And he left, she said. The video only shows him getting into his car and driving off. I lived in a moderately large town just like Ryan. Finding someone's address online was ridiculously easy. Out of curiosity, I Googled my phone number, and sure enough, my address popped up instantly. I called him. "Stop following my wife." A pause, then a chuckle. "Following her?" he repeated, amused. "Victor, she's the one who called me." My grip tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning white. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A message. A video. I hesitated for half a second before opening it. The moment it started playing, my stomach dropped. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I watched. It was Grace. With him. In his home. "I'm done with her. Now you can stop worrying about me following her." Ryan had just made things even easier for me. The video was only a few seconds long. But it was enough. More than enough. I hadn't confronted her yet. But I knew. This marriage was over. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling everything and nothing all at once. My mind raced, but one thought kept resurfacing. What the hell do I do now? If it weren't for the kids, this would be so much simpler. For the first time in my life, I had a fleeting thought. I wished I wasn't a father. But the moment the thought formed, I pushed it away. I love my kids. They're the only reason I haven't completely lost it. I knew the video would be useful in the divorce. I didn't know if Ryan had sent me the full version, but what he gave me was enough. More than enough. I had almost let her convince me otherwise. I had been on the verge of letting it all go, until I saw it. In the background of the video, Harry Potter was playing. That little detail, for some reason, made it feel even worse. Things had been tense ever since. I kept my distance, but eventually, I confronted her. I walked into the house, my heart pounding, and found her sitting on the couch. She looked up, her expression unreadable. I pulled out my phone, opened the video, and placed it on the table in front of her. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't press play, didn't say a word. The silence stretched between us, suffocating. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked defeated. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," I scoffed, crossing my arms. "That's it." She exhaled slowly, nodding. "I don't know what else to say." I clenched my jaw. "You almost had me convinced. I was ready to move past this." I gestured toward the phone. But then this happened. She didn't argue, didn't try to deny it. She just sat there, emotionless. "What do you want me to do?" I let out a bitter laugh. "There's nothing you can do. I'm filing for divorce." She blinked, processing my words, then simply nodded. "I understand." There was more to the conversation, more back and forth, more emptiness. But that was the gist of it. At some point, she offered to leave. "I should go," she murmured. I shook my head. "No, my work schedule is crazy right now. It makes more sense if I leave, for the kids' sake." But she insisted. "I can't be here, Victor. I won't be able to help with the kids in my state." She looked hollow, numb, and, for once, I believed her. I made arrangements with her parents. They agreed to take the kids Monday through Friday. I'd have them on weekends. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best I could do. Then she just left. No explanation. No destination. Not even a goodbye to the kids. Her parents had no idea where she went either. A full day passed with no word from her. Finally, frustration got the better of me, and I texted Ryan. "Is Grace with you?" I stared at my phone, waiting. No response. I sighed and typed again. "I don't care if she is, but she left here, and I haven't heard from her. Just need to know what's going on." Took him a while, but eventually he responded. "I haven't seen her." That didn't ease my mind. If she wasn't with him, then where the hell was she? The next day, her parents reached out. Their message was brief, but enough to momentarily quell the anxiety clawing at my chest. "We've heard from her. She's safe." Nothing more. No explanations. No details. And honestly, I didn't care. The following morning, cops knocked on my door. A welfare check. I knew immediately who was behind it. Only one person had a reason to pull something like this. Ryan. An officer stood on my porch, his posture polite but firm. We received a call expressing concern that your wife might be in danger after a domestic dispute. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I haven't even seen my wife since she left. They asked her parents. Confirmed everything. A few minutes later, they left, realizing there was nothing to investigate. I watched their car pull out of my driveway, exhaustion sinking deep into my bones. Just another layer to this mess. Later that day, I spoke with my divorce lawyer. The financial breakdown hit like a sledgehammer. With your income and work schedule, you're looking at around 70 to 30 custody at best, he explained. And even with that, you'll likely be paying about $900 a month in child support. I exhaled slowly. Even if it's 50 to 50? He nodded. Yes, and spousal support is a possibility, though her infidelity could help reduce it. But you'd still have to split assets and debts evenly. I did the math in my head. If I wanted to keep saving for retirement, I'd barely be able to afford rent for myself. The thought of paying for her to stay in our house while I scrambled to find a place made my blood boil. For the first time, a thought I never imagined crossed my mind. Staying together. Not for love. Not for her. But for the kids. Then, out of nowhere, a text. I'm at my sister's in Kansas. Just wanted you to know. I stared at the screen for a while before replying. Okay. A few minutes later, another message. I had an abortion. I didn't tell you I was pregnant. I couldn't. I read the words over and over, my mind unable to process them. A part of me wanted to hurl my phone against the wall. Another part felt like my heart had been ripped from my chest. It was mine. It had to be. Ryan had been using protection in that damn video. I sat down, rubbing my hands over my face as a strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. Anger, sadness, relief. What was there to say? I typed back, okay. Then I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling. This whole thing sucked. Filing for divorce was more draining than I expected. Every step felt like trudging through mud, but I pushed forward. My lawyer laid out my options. Her infidelity might reduce spousal support, but everything else would go by the book. When I finally told Grace I was moving forward with it, she just nodded. No argument, no begging, no theatrics. It was like she had already made peace with it. I'll sign whatever you need me to, she said quietly one evening as I stopped by to pick up some of my things. I don't want to fight you on this. I wanted to be angry, wanted to tell her that she had already fought me in the worst way possible by sleeping with another man. But I was too drained to argue. The paperwork moved quickly. She let me keep my retirement savings. In return, I didn't fight her on keeping the house. It was for the kids anyway. I pushed for as much custody as possible, but in the end, the judge sided with her. Primary custody went to her. I got weekly visitation. Not ideal, but fighting it would drain me further. Kelly deserved stability. And as much as I despised Grace, I knew she was a good mother. 2 months later, the divorce decree arrived in the mail. A single envelope holding the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, letting the weight of it settle over me. It was done. 6 years of marriage, reduced to legal jargon and a few signatures. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. Relief? Sadness? Closure? Instead, I just felt hollow. Then, out of nowhere, something I never saw coming. Ryan was dead. A mutual acquaintance broke the news. Car crash. No drugs, no alcohol. Just bad weather and bad luck. He lost control on the highway, flipped the car, and that was it. I sat with the news for a long time, unsure how to process it. This was the man who had wrecked my marriage. Humiliated me in ways I never thought possible. And yet, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Grace never reached out. I never asked. I knew she was dealing with it in her own way. Life moved on. I saw Kelly every week. Those visits became my anchor, the only thing that truly mattered in the aftermath of everything. I wasn't sure what the future looked like for me, but at least the past was finally behind me. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.